Welcome to Baseball and Coffee with Tino and Aaron. What's up, Aaron?
Good. How are you?
Good, man. So episode 60 is going to be our top 8 starting pitchers for redraft. Uh, Maybe our favorite episode of the rankings. We both love pitching. I think Aaron is the probably wins that battle, but I too love starting pitching. We're also going to go
Oh,
into
you're inching closer for sure.
I'm trying. We'll get into our initial thoughts with our TGFBI draft. We are how many rounds in? 15 or so, I believe.
We are in the 18th.
18th round.
We're coming up on 18th, finishing. So we're about to make our 17th round pick. We're 5 picks away, and then we're going into the 18th.
Sweet. It's been fun. I really do like our team so far. I know we say that about all of our teams every year, but I mean it. And then we'll talk a little bit about some of our thoughts with spring training thus far, and then finish up with a little bit of talk about our own spring training trip that is literally 5 days away. I can't believe it,
Yeah.
man. It's amazing. All right, you got any coffee stories for us today?
Yeah. So my coffee store this week, I had the opportunity to taste some new coffees that are coming to the menu at Passenger, which is where I work full time now. Still part time at Starbucks for anyone who's interested. But yeah, Three Kenyans. The names of these coffees represent the communities and the washing stations where they're from. So I tried a Kenya Dedan, a Kenya Ichimara, and a Kenya Gathani. Um, and they were what impressed me, or what was fun about doing this exercise was, I think if you have a Kenya, it has a very distinct acidity, citrus quality, but I have three side by side. You get to see more kind of the nuance between them. The Daydon was really, really tart, almost too tart for me. It almost had like a lime peel quality to it, just almost like puckering. Not my particular favorite. The Ichimara was more balanced, more red fruit sweetness, like agave, kind of blood orange. And then the Gathini was just really complex. Had some really nice florals, some mangoes, some like even like a little bit of like ginger baking spice. Just a really nuanced, beautiful cup. And it was funny. I had tasted all three, and then the our head roaster who helps actually with the buying of the coffees, like that coffee tastes like, or that coffee is like $2 more a pound than the other two.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't know that going in, but like when I tasted all that complexity in the last cup,
Mm-hmm.
I was like, wow, that really tastes like it cost $2 more
Right.
than and they were all good. Don't get me, I mean, they were all super high quality, but it was
Yeah.
just, yeah, having that experience and then hearing someone who actually bought helped buy the coffee talk about like that actually shows up in the cost. But
Right.
yeah, really, really fantastic that time of year, moving towards summer where Kenya's in
Mm-hmm.
full harvest. So
That's fun.
yeah, it was a blast.
Awesome. Uh, my coffee story is I'm excited for whatever coffee you choose to bring to spring training because it's
Yeah, you
you
wanted to
know
South America, right? I gave you options. We're going with Brazil or Colombia.
yeah, I think I obviously I'd be happy with damn near anything. I just but it's yeah, my coffee choices are limited here in Walla Walla. I could certainly, mail away for coffee if I wanted to, but yeah, just excited to try something new and try the coffee that that you kind of put your career behind and you're passionate about. Um, that'll be fun for me to have that experience. So looking forward to it. We just have to figure out how we're gonna
And
do it. We'll be good.
yeah, and Matt, if you're listening, we're not going to 7-Eleven.
I might do
He
both. I might need
he
to do
texts.
both.
He's like, I'm looking forward to hanging out, and Matt is, for anyone who's listening, Matt is Tino's partner on his Monos pod, and a friend of ours. He's like, I'm looking forward to hanging out in Arizona, and I was like, yeah, over coffee. And he texted back, he's like, yeah, 7-Eleven coffee. I'm like, no, we're gonna be brewing coffee. We're going to better. We're doing better than that.
Right? We're adults now. It's funny. All right, man. TGFBI. Initial thoughts. What is your first? Give me like one sentence reaction to our draft so far.
Plate appearances, plate appearances, plate appearances. I think we've built a team that is not without ceiling and upside, I think. But I think we've also taking players who have like a really high floor in terms of plate appearances and volume. And I think that's what's has me excited about the team. Yeah, that's my one sentence effort to answer your question. But yeah, I think I saw you just take a drink of your coffee. But yeah, having like Kirk as our C1, who's gonna DH and play a ton of catcher and be their cleanup hitter. Abreu talked about, Albie's coming off his last season, like easily bats for 650, 700 times. Devers, and then Jordan in the outfield. I just think we just got a tremendous base of plate appearances, RBIs, runs, power, and so
Yeah, I like the hitter wise. I like the fact that we balance. There is some boring in our team, right? Like Abreu to me is pretty boring.
yeah,
Javi Baez is our shortstop. We did wait on shortstop for a long time, but I think that his season last season was slightly underrated because we've seen Javi Baez as a star and he signed the huge contract. And so it was a letdown as far as comparing it to when he was, like in the top 3 or top 5 of shortstops fantasy wise. But he still is he's still kind of a 15, 12 steal or 20 and 12 steal sort of player, right? And the park came in a little bit. I think the younger players are going to get a little bit better. So I think he was a value where we got him. And there are a number of players I think like Devers. I think Devers is better than people are ranking him this year. If you look at, and if he's to achieve what he did in 21, we got an absolute, he has to be a first round pick, right? We got an absolute steal if he gets close to what he did in 21. And Albies is one that I just think people have forgotten about. And people have picked him apart because they've had a year and a half to pick him apart. And what you realize is that he's an accumulator. He's not like a super duper talented player necessarily, but if he stays healthy, he's a runs and RBI machine with steals and power, right? So I do really like our hitting. I think our outfield's going to need a little help. Eventually, we've got Jordan, as you said, he was our first round pick. We picked him at 11. I understand why he fell because of the injury news, but with his hands. But man, if Alvarez is Alvarez and we got him at 11, that's a bargain and a half. And then we picked Seiya Suzuki. He's going to be out for probably a month or so. That's one pick I may have done differently, I think, if we could go back, just given the length of injury. And then we took Bellinger as our third outfielder. And he's another one like Baez. I think he gets really pushed down because of what people want from him. But he's still putting up homers and steals, right? And he's going to play every day because of his outfield defense. So if one of those guys, Bellinger or Devers or Baez, gets back to where they were, just one, we're in business with our hitting. And I do love the fact that we have Anthony Volpe. I just think he's a star. And then our pitching.
More on that later. I mean, I just want to respond to a couple of things. So, one, I think Seiya Suzuki, it's a kind of an unknown timeline, right? They're not really putting a timeline on it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think around the Bellinger, I think I'm just looking at the board. Other outfielders, and we took Bellinger in the 16th. So here's some of the outfielders that went right ahead of him, like within 20 picks: Garrett Mitchell, Harrison Bader, Joey Meneses, Michael Conforto, Ramon Leano, Esther Ruiz, Mitch Haniger, Andrew Benintendi.
Right.
So when I look at those names, I see like a lot of one-note guys, like speed only, power only. I see Meneses, who's kind of a journeyman coming off of maybe a career year. You got Verdugo and Benintendi are kind of like boring, like 10-15 guys.
Right.
I think 10-15 is probably Bellinger's floor.
Right.
And he has, to me, I think the power, speed. Like you look at his launch angle, his exit velocity, it's all still there.
Right.
From when he popped those really great seasons. It's just about his batting, his batting eye coming back to the point where, the batting average particularly sends and he gets to more of that power. So, so yeah, I think where he went as a third outfielder, it would be great. In an ideal world, he's our fourth, but in a 6-15 team expert league, I don't know if that's necessarily attainable.
Right. Yeah. 19,
yeah. Sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
19 homers, 14 steals, 70 runs, 68 RBIs, and he hit 210. Right. I fully expect just the change from LA to Chicago and the lack of pressure or the lessening of pressure to increase his batting average a bit. The big problem is just that his launch angle, we talked about this in the previous episode, his launch angle has just gone up and up and up. And so he needs to level that swing out a bit. But hey, like, you have to take some gambles to win in TGFBI. And that's a gamble that I was targeting from the beginning and I really like a lot. Pitching wise, I want to say thank you to you because you were willing to flex a little bit, right? Off of kind of what your typical thought process is. And I think that's part of the beauty of our, working relationship, is that we trust each other in situations like a TGFBI draft to argue back and forth a bit and then ultimately say, you know what, I trust you, or you know what, this is my gut would say typically go one direction, but we're going to go the other because you really believe in it. And it worked for us. We won our local league last year and we finished 16th overall, I think in part because of those conversations. So this time we took Luis Castillo as our SP1 and we got him in round 3. Is that right?
4.
That's a steal as far as I'm concerned. I'm shocked to get him in round 4, honestly. I love that pick. You'll see where I rank. I actually have him on this episode. You'll see where I rank him. And then the big ones were, we pushed up George Kirby and Hunter Green a bit higher than ADP. And the conversations between the two of us were just that, I think that Kirby's an easy one to agree on, just because you're literally picking the pitcher with probably the best command in baseball. And he's not a soft tosser, right? And he came up his first year, he was brilliant. We all know what he did for the Mariners. And he's not a pitcher that is exerting maximum effort. He's a pitcher who is very smart and learning, but he can put the ball wherever he wants. He pitches on a 90-win team in a big park. To me, that was a bit of I imagine if Kirby pitched in New York, right? Or Kirby pitched in Chicago or LA, he would have been 30 spots higher, but he's pitching for the Mariners, right? And so he doesn't get the same pub. And then we picked Hunter Green. And the thing for me with Green is, and I said this on the Potapalooza episode, look at his second half stats. He was pretty much the best pitcher in the major leagues in the second half. And so to me, what that says about a young pitcher like Green with that kind of stuff is he's learning. And he was absolutely dominant in the second half. I'll bring up the stats in a minute. So yes, we pushed him up. Yes, people are going to, talk shit about that pick a little bit. But like I said, just go look at his second half and then tell me that you don't want that guy on your team. Comments on the first 3?
No, that was one of the things I wrote down, just our thought process and the team build that we had, starting Alvarez, Devers, Albies.
Mm-hmm.
I think getting Devers and Albies at third base and second base respectively, prioritizing those positions and the quality of those players.
Mm-hmm.
And then coming back and hammering 3 starting pitchers in a row, getting Castillo, Kirby, and Green. And, we had the dialogue. My recollection of that process was not, I think we were aligned on how we saw the players. It was more, do we take them here?
Yes. Yes.
And so we chose to do that. And I think collectively looking at them as a group, I really like how they fit together. Mm-hmm. You don't always know when you're going pick to pick how it's going to grow, because you don't know what's going to present itself in the future rounds. But I think as a group, we just got a group of pitchers that have command, that have stuff, that have strikeouts and not really any primary innings concerns. And so that allows us to miss later on when we're taking guys who have more question marks, because we have, and we want not be as at much risk because we have such a strong innings and strikeouts base. And, with Kirby, I anecdotally, just knowing that he is kind of a pitching savant, and his ability to manipulate and change his arsenal and continue to develop and grow on top of the velocity and command he already has, is something that I really believe in.
He's the kind of pitcher, we were talking about the cutter before we started recording today. He's the kind of pitcher that someone could just teach him the cutter and he would go out there and start throwing it in a game and nobody even knew that he had a cutter in his arsenal.
Exactly.
He'd be painting the strike zone with a cutter just because he's that kind of He's got that kind of talent, right? So I think the sky's the limit for him. Real quickly with Green, so through July, he had his ERA was in the fives. Everybody was worried about him. He was surrendering all those home runs. They sit him for a while. He gets hurt. They sit him for a while. He comes back, and in August and September, so when I talk about second half stats, I'm including a portion of July. But in August he pitched 6 innings, he no runs. September and October, it was 23 innings and a .78 ERA. So in the second half, technically, it was 35 and a third innings, a 1.02 ERA, 51 strikeouts, and 12.99 strikeouts per nine. His K rate was 36.7%. His walk rate was 5.8. K minus BB in the second half, 30.9%.
Yeah.
And his whip was 0.85, right? So is he
Yep.
going to do that for the entire season? No. But I think that's closer to the pitcher that he is. I haven't brought up his pitch usage, but my guess, what I remember is that he went more slider heavy in the second half of the season and started to get away from the fastball because they were just sitting fastball with Hunter Green. He kind of fell in love with throwing a 102-mile-an-hour fastball, and it was getting hit. So he started being more slider heavy. We'll get into to pitch usage a little bit later as well.
Yeah. I think your comment that resonated with me is he's exceptionally bright player, and he's adapting right at the highest level. And I think what you see him that he changes is involves his fixed mitch and sequencing in the second half. You saw the results of that. And to me, like I don't really want to hear I'm all about looking at ballparks and things like that on the margins as like a tiebreaker. But when you have someone that's as talented as Hunter Green is, like that's not a deciding factor for me.
Right. I agree.
That's a tiebreaker when you're in the medium to low range and you're trying to decide two evenly talented guys. Like to me, Hunter Green is an ascendant talent as your third starter. He could have 250 strikeouts.
Right. 100%.
I mean, that's a 95% outcome, but that's within the range of possibility.
It's a realistic thought, right?
Absolutely.
It truly is. The other two pitchers that we picked, I actually like these two as well. So our fourth pitcher was Jesus Luzardo. When you start to kind of dig into Luzardo, you realize that I think he's being slept on a bit, right?
Yeah.
So he ended up, let's see here. He ended up with a 3.32 ERA. He had a 30% K rate and an 8.8% walk rate. He's not someone that we talk about a ton, but he also didn't surrender very many hits. So 69 hits in 100 innings last year. So all of those rate stats look great. The question with him has been health previously, and he did, I think, lose some velocity for a while that he's regained. But he's in an organization with the Marlins that knows pitching. He pitches in a big park, and you see the rate stat talent there for him. So I don't like extrapolating or taking 100 innings and saying, okay, what if he pitches 160 innings? Yeah. But the reality is he's 24. And so that is a realistic thought process, right? To build upon those 100 innings. And if he can maintain what he's been doing, we stumbled on a gem at SP4. And then our fifth is Luis Garcia. He's I'd call him a bit boring, not his windup, which has changed actually because of the new rules, but just as far as his stats go, but he pitches for Houston. He won 15 games last year, and that's something that is of value. And he had an ERA under 4. So if we can get 12 to 15 wins and an ERA under 4 from our SP5, I think we've done a really great job in building a staff. We have not taken any relievers yet, and we are in round 17 or 18 now. But why don't you talk a little bit about what our strategy is for our relief corps?
Yeah, so I mean, we didn't have to, I think, talk about it too much going in about the fact that we weren't going to draft relievers in the first 5 or 6 rounds, and the way that takes shape in these types of leagues with these types of managers is you're going to be on the outside looking in then because closers are pushed up. But yeah, what we decided to do was, I think, really just invest in our ability to find guys during the season. And I think our focus, and we'll see how it takes shape the next completion as we move towards completion here and review it again. But I think we're going to be targeting pitchers that are going to complement our ratios and really get after strikeouts and focus on that. And worry about the acquiring saves when we have more information in terms of usage and things like that in the season. And
Mhm.
this was to some degree, last year was last year, but I think both of us are really confident in our ability to acquire relievers during the season. And again, I think for me, just doing that when you have more information of how they're being used in games and we get them in stadiums where we have 100% view on the data. You can really make a lot better calculations. And so I feel more comfortable. And what we're going to do is draft pitchers of quality and go after the saves category specifically once we get into the fab, because this is a fab league where
Mhm.
we can acquire during season. This is not a draft and hold.
Right. I think it's worth saying that relief pitching is very league dependent, right? It's not that we don't value relief pitching. It's that in
Mm-hmm.
this particular league in TGFBI, in that you can't trade, but you do have fab money. The reality is that closers get tons of helium in the draft, right? You saw
Right.
last season, we saw Josh Hader and Liam Hendricks going as high as like high round 2, and which is, pick 16 through pick 25 essentially. And the position is too volatile as far as role and injury in my mind to invest in closers that high. So you're just not getting a top 10 closer unless you choose to invest that high. So our approach has been to go with more bulk, more strikeouts, acquire talent, and hope that talent does assume either the closer role or accumulate some saves throughout the year. The other thing is, in a different type of league, right? I kept a closer and a potential closer in our hybrid keeper league. But in my mind, in that particular league, closers are, if you have a closer who has a role in that league, it's costing you your 15th keeper. It's not costing you your second round pick. That's not keeper number 2. It's keeper number 15, which is to me a huge difference in value. That said, I'm probably crazy for keeping a reliever, but whatever. It is what it is. So closing thoughts on TGFBI. I keep going back to I have not really had a chance to roster Yordan Alvarez, and when you look at his batted ball numbers, he's Aaron Judge, right? If he's healthy, he's Aaron Judge. It's not saying he's going to hit 62 home runs, but he could hit 320 with 40. And to get him at 11, I think was a steal. I love that we got Devers. And then I think about those two plus our pitching. Our pitching is just, I love our pitching staff. I really, really, really love our pitching staff. The only regret that I really have is, besides Suzuki, is that I was looking at players that were available after Albies, and O'Neill Cruz might have been fun. That was more of a gamble though. Corbin Carroll might have been fun. Also a gamble, but less so. And Scherzer was still on the board. And I think that would have changed the complexion of our pitching staff. Is probably the smart pick to pick Albies, just not super exciting to me. And then from an overall standpoint, Tucker at 6, my feelings on Kyle Tucker. I think that's ridiculous. There's no way in hell I'm picking him at 6. Betts at 7, a little high, but makes sense. I understand it. Pete Alonso at 13. Were you surprised by that at all?
I was. I really was.
Is it a homer pick? Do you know? I haven't
I
looked
do
at
not know.
that.
I don't know who that is. I was very surprised. And there wasn't another first baseman until round 4 with Matt Olson. And
Right.
to me, we talked about in our first base rankings, like you look at the batted ball stats, and there's just really not a lot to separate Alonso from Olson. So the fact that Olson went to 3+ rounds later, I think speaks to the shape of the position. And I think I'll leave my comment at that pick right there.
I think both of those guys could have gone at the bottom of round 2, the top of round 3, and that would have been more true value. I think the Olson pick is a very good pick, and the Alonso pick is just high. But people could say the same about us with Kirby and Green, right? At least from an ADP
I
standpoint.
suppose so. Yeah, I mean, if you got the 13th pick, I mean, I would argue that he could have taken with the third round pick, and that would have still been 7 picks ahead of Olson.
Right. And then I have Strider at the 210 was interesting to me. Someone was going to bite. It wasn't going to be I wasn't going to allow that personally. I mean, I was thankful for what he did last year. I still want to wait a little bit. And then the only other one that I want to talk about is I think Varsho at 215 is 215, meaning the bottom of the second round, is way high. You know, my feelings on him too, as a platoon hitter.
Yeah.
I think that's it for me on TGFBI. We also have both catchers, which is both catchers and both corner infielders already. And I think that's an accomplishment. The Bell pick was an example of us working together. I don't think I would have gone Bell if it was just me picking, but I'm really, in hindsight, really happy that we got him where we did. And then I think Logan O'Hoppe is a 20 home run catcher, honestly. All right,
Sweet.
that's it. Let's take a quick break. We'll come back and start with our SP top 8.
All right.
All right, man. Let's do it. Top starting pitchers. Give me your number one.
Jake the Snake, not Jake Plummer. No, Jake DeGrom.
Is number one?
Yeah.
Ooh.
I'm not sure he's not the best fantasy player in general when he's pitching.
So
And this is not
assuming
well, assuming health, yeah. I mean, that's what you have to do, right?
okay,
I mean, to me, this is about skill and stuff. Like, these are my rankings. These are who I think the best pitchers are. It's not about like redraft and all that stuff. Like, if I was in an auction and had an opportunity just to draft whoever I wanted, you know, I think he's as good as all the guys are on this list. His numbers absolutely dwarf anybody else. And I know.
Okay, so I took health into account.
Okay, fair enough.
So if we're just talking pure ability, pure stuff, sure. If we're talking, I made my list based on, if I'm drafting, where do I rank these players if I'm drafting for 2023? Okay.
All right.
I don't have him on my top 8. I don't have him in my top 16. I might have him in my SP2. So the way that I'm looking at it is, I don't know if I'm getting 100 innings from him. So while I totally acknowledge the statistics, he threw 64 innings last year, man.
He's due.
No,
but I mean, he's a
that's
guy.
one way to look at it. That's one way to look at it. All right, let's talk. Let's talk
he's
DeGrom.
he's a guy that's thrown over 190 innings 4 times, right? So there's a lot of guys on this list. One of my favorite pitchers, just throw him under the bus. Tyler Glasnow is on my list. He's never done that before.
Sure.
Jay McClanahan, Spencer Strider, never done that before.
Sure.
So I understand the health risk, and and I don't want to be flippant about pitcher injuries, because my heart breaks a lot of these times when these guys get hurt, both when they're on my roster and just for them as individuals. But there's that saying of like, there's 2 types of pitchers: there's the ones who are hurt and the ones that are going to be hurt. And I don't think that means for fantasy that you can just throw injury risk out the window.
Right.
And I'm not necessarily saying to do that with DeGrom. I just think with DeGrom, he's so damn good that I think, to me, he's the best pitcher in fantasy, just because the impact he has on a per inning basis. Sure. And knowing that even the pool, the competitors, are not immune from a lot of the same issues that he's experienced. Like, and I countered your point of like, hey, he has 190 innings 4 times in his career, so maybe he can return to that. Maybe some of the guys on this list get to that level. But I think it's all part of the mix. But he's just so much better. I had to put him first.
So 2 thoughts. The first one is, I believe his velocity jump, it was in lockstep with the beginning of the injuries. And so there have been people who have said that it's with DeGrom, it's either 190 innings and human, or 100, maybe 120 innings and superhuman, and you're not necessarily going to get both. In my mind, I think he's chosen to be the pitcher that's going to throw 120 superhuman innings, knowing that he's probably going to get hurt. Yeah, and I think so. Okay, let me ask you this: if we're doing so, if you did the list the way I did, which is 2023 redraft, and you were going to put DeGrom, you're going to rank DeGrom, how many innings do you need from DeGrom to put him at 1?
140.
Okay. I think that's fair. I think you could probably make the case for something slightly lower even, right? Because
Maybe,
the
yeah.
innings are so, as you said, so dominant. His xFIP was 153. His whip was 0.75, right? Like he was just, his swinging strike rate was 21.1%. I'm in agreement that the skill is number one. There's no way I'm picking him
Right.
because
And
of
that
the,
was clear because when I asked you, I'm like, hey, DeGrom, it's like DeGrom and someone else. You didn't even reply.
no, I didn't. I can't. There's too much
It's
risk. I think there are other places to take risks with roster construction than your number one starter, but I
no, but like he would have been our second at that point. But I
right,
took the message. I got it.
right. I appreciate it. Uh, my number one is Corbin Burns. Um, I did do a pretty deep dive into each of these top eight. Burns last season, 12-8, 2.94 ERA, 202 innings, 243 strikeouts, 30.5% K rate. There was nothing in his profile for me that said that this is anything outside of who he truly is. He's a little higher ground ball heavy than a lot of the pitchers on this list at 47%. What I think is fascinating is that he throws the cutter 55.4% of the time. And last year, he surrendered a 213 average with a 335 slug on the cutter and a 27.8% whiff rate, which is actually very, very high for a cut fastball. His curveball is
Negative 21 run value
that's
on
right.
that pitch.
Yep, which is nuts, right? His curveball is his best pitch, but you can't throw the curveball over and over again because they'll start sitting on it. But he threw it
Don't tell
18.4%.
that to Alex Lang.
Well, his curveball's nasty. 127 surrendered a 127 average and a 263 slug on the curve. And then he throws the change slider and sinker under 10% of the time. But sinker being his least effective pitch from an average and slug standpoint. But he's money. And I think barring injury, his stuff has remained, pretty much the same. There's just the slightest dip in movement and velocity between 22 and 21, but I think that's to be expected given the usage on the arm. He looks to be a, 200 plus inning, 220, 230, 240 strikeouts every year. He did have a dip in his K rate as well. I think his K rate went down 5% or so over the previous year, over 21. So there are these little things in his profile to keep an eye on. But man, 3 pitches with the 40% whiff rate is with some form of command
And
is
a ground ball lean.
it's the secret sauce. I bring this up a lot, but it was what led us to Dylan Cease last year. If you have a pitcher with 3 pitches above a 40% whiff rate and they have the stamina to be a starter, you're in business with an SP1 potentially. So he's my number one. I have him, you can take 1 and 2 for me and put them in a hat and pick one out. I don't think there's a lot that differentiates my 1 and 2, but in a vacuum, if I had the choice between Burns and my number 2, I'm taking Burns. Where do you have him?
Burns for me is 2. I think you spoke to his strengths. I think pitchers peak later than hitters. He's entering his age 28 season, so he's kind of in that nadir of his, his ascension. As you mentioned, his over 200 innings last year at 167 and 21, so he's kind of ascending. So he should be in line for that full workload again. So yeah, there's not a lot to pick nits on with him. He does induce a little bit, or he does get hit a little bit more in the zone than some of the other elite pitchers in this area. But I think he negates that with the depth of his arsenal and getting the ground ball lean and the volume, right?
Right.
So there's guys that are more elusive in the zone, more a little bit more swing and miss or chase, but they also don't have his command or track record of volume.
Right.
I think in fantasy, sometimes we toggle that volume and then that per inning sort of dynamic qualities. Whereas him, you don't have to make that choice. You're getting dynamic swing and miss with volume.
One other stat with from Burns is his chase contact rate is 15% less than league average, meaning when batters chase pitches from Burns outside of the zone, they make contact with them 15% less than the average pitcher. And I think that is, for me, that's a big stat, right? It means that they really don't, you can't differentiate with Burns a strike and a ball in a lot of ways. And the minute he throws so hard that the minute you do, you've already committed and it's too late. The other interesting fact with him is that he's a bit of a unicorn in that he throws his cutter more than half the time.
Right.
And that's I'm assuming he just gets a natural cut action on his fastball. And so it registers as a cutter, but it's really him throwing his version of his fastball. But you just don't see that out of starting pitchers. His repertoire is super interesting. Cutter, curve, change, slider is basically Corbin Burns. Super fun. Not a player that I would have expected to be an SP1 3 years ago, but I'm happy for him, and I'd love to have him on my team. All right, so your 2 is Burns. My 2 is Garrett Cole. Where do you have Cole?
7.
Okay. What I see from Cole is the same pitcher that he's always been. He gave up a lot of home runs last year. Let me see. I have the number here somewhere. 33 home runs last year. I think that, home runs you can have home run heavy pitchers, but I think for him, some of it was just luck and kind of having an off year in some ways. He does surrender a lot of hard contact. So his barrel rate was only in the 15th percentile and his hard hit in the 29th. That said, he's still a 250 strikeout, 200 inning starter on a team that expects to win 90 games. Last year, he had 13-8 with a 3.5 ERA, 200 and 2/3 innings, 257 strikeouts. Pretty standard profile, 42% ground ball, 14.3% swinging strike rate, which is actually the lowest for him since 2018. But his velocities remain steady year over year, and I expect him to straighten out a bit of it. The other concerning thing with him is that his slugging percentages surrendered on the various pitches were a little higher than a lot of the pitchers that are in this range. Again, for me, with a pitcher of Garrett Cole's talent in an organization like the Yankees, I expect that to be a tweak that changes, that gets him back to where he needs to be. The run value on the fastball went from -17 to -8. And the only real difference that I saw in the fastball from a velocity and movement standpoint was that there is a 1.6-inch reduction in horizontal break. I don't know if that's a reason to surrender more home runs on the fastball, but I didn't see any other difference. There may have been a command difference with the four seam. I think that's probably more likely. But you could still call him probably the most talented starting pitcher in baseball. I don't like him. He's a Yankee. I never liked him as an Astro. He's been on my two kind of enemy teams as far as being a Mariners fan. So I've never really been a fan, but I think the numbers speak for themselves. There's been no real drop in velocity or movement. Swinging strike rate is still elite. It's not where it was for him, but it's still elite. The stuff is elite. Again, I chalk up the 33 home runs to a bit of luck, and I do expect Garrett Cole to get back to probably a lower ERA than 3.5 next year. That's why I have him here. Any other thoughts on Cole?
I differ a little bit. He's going into his age 32 season. I think he's someone that was affected the most dramatically by the sticky stuff enforcement, and that's something that's going to be reinforced this year. As he ages, I think all pitchers as they age, whether it be Scherzer or Verlander, there is a bit of a pitching with less velocity and less spin that you have to kind of go through, and I think he may be approaching that. The hard contact is what pushes me down a little bit. His home run to fly ball rate, while it was high, he did deserve it based on the quality of contact. But I look at his expected home run to fly ball rate, it was only 2% less than what he actually got. So it wasn't markedly unlucky, just based on the quality of contact that he was giving up. He kind of spoke to that in the slug. So that's why I have him down at 7, but still a very good, starter, obviously.
How much of, I guess, how much of a hard hit or uh barrel rate with the pitcher do you attribute to the pitcher's skills, and how much of it is luck or competition for you when you're looking at that stat?
Well, I think it depends. So I think with him, home run to fly ball rate takes multiple seasons to stabilize. So with Cole, we have the advantage of having, he's again 32, so he's been in the league since 2015. So you his historical home run to fly ball rates and kind of see, like, I think at that point you can start to trust it, right?
Sure.
Because it is a stat that takes a larger sample size. So yeah, certainly within a season or half a season, if someone is getting progressively unlucky where they're in their home run to fly ball rate comparison to their career rates or comparison to league norms, you probably want to regress that. But with Cole, what I see is kind of his career rates being pretty close to where he's at now. And I think as he ages and he loses spin, that it's something he's going to have to work to negate or continue to keep at the same level as he ages.
I wonder, I'm just spitballing now, but I do,
Yeah.
if I'm looking at Cole and I look, and as you pointed out, his home run to fly ball rate has been pretty stable for the last 4 years, or I guess 5 of the last 6 years. If I'm Cole and I'm 32 and I've thrown 3,000 plus pitches in 5 of the last 8 years, including the COVID year, I may reintroduce the two-seam fastball that he was taught by Pittsburgh, and people have been hypercritical of Pittsburgh because they had him throwing this two-seamer. He goes to Houston, they get him to use the four-seam and slider more, and all of a sudden he's a Cy Young Award winner, right? And without any new pitches, just simply with usage change. We know four-seam and slider is what works currently, right? But as we saw with Robbie Ray for a couple of starts, when his four-seam and slider weren't working, he threw a two-seam for the first time, to get some ground balls, to get some weak contact, to allow him time to work on his 2 primary pitches, and it worked for him. What I'm getting at with Cole is if he's surrendering a 420 slug and a whole bunch of home runs off of a four-seam fastball that he's throwing 52% of the time, why wouldn't you mix in a two-seam, especially in a park that surrenders home runs like Yankee Stadium does to left-handed bats? Why wouldn't you introduce a two-seam? Sometimes it might even be like a 10%, 15% usage, but literally just changing your grip to try to get some weak contact to get them to lay off of that four-seam fastball because the effectiveness isn't quite there. For me, that's something I would want my pitcher to do. I'd be like, hey, Garrett, here's the deal. Your four-seam is great. You've lost a little bit of juice on it. It will be so much more effective, the four-seam will, if they've got the two-seam in their head as well, right? I wonder how difficult that would be to introduce that to Cole, or reintroduce that to Cole coming into the season. I wouldn't be surprised to see it, to be honest with you, but I'll be watching that from him. Just a random thought. Who is your number 3?
Who's your number 3?
Shohei Ohtani.
Yes.
Same? Are we in agreement?
Yes.
That's awesome.
Man, I was ready to get on my soapbox, and
right.
Here we go.
Nah.
No. Yeah, Ohtani is my number 3. Man, that's exciting. So yeah, one of those moments we have a shared brain. That doesn't happen too often. No, but for me, like Ohtani, I love the guy, and that, but I see him a little bit differently than I think a lot of people. Most people, when I listen to podcasts and stuff, they talk about drafting Ohtani as kind of like a fallback if they don't get one of the top 8 hitters. Like, oh, I'll just take Ohtani. I'll use him as a hitter. I think he just gets overlooked to how good he is as a pitcher. I know that all stats have their flaws, but his, just as an example, we just talked glowingly about Corbin Burns. His xFIP and Sierra were better than Burns last year. His swinging strike rate, it was 14.9%. His K minus VBU was also better than Corbin Burns. And again, not saying that he's better than Corbin Burns, because Corbin Burns has delivered a volume that Ohtani has not to date. But I think it's, again, people can be easily overlooked just how good he is as a pitcher. The swinging strike rate and the athleticism on the mound and those kinds of things. He's a tremendous fielder as a pitcher. And I think the Angels are going to look to get him on the mound more. So
Mhm.
some of those volume differences that have kind of pushed him down from an accumulation standpoint in fantasy may be mitigated this year. And I would be surprised if in 2 years the conversation turns where people are talking about Ohtani the pitcher and you might use him as a hitter, less so. We'll see about that, but I might be a little bit ahead of the curve because I think it's getting to the point where to me his pitching is going to supersede his hitting, because he's getting that good.
I think for me, it already has. And that's part of why he's, I didn't have him 3 last year. I didn't anticipate having him 3 before this exercise. But my first note in my thoughts column in my notes is if Ohtani was a pitcher only, he'd probably be my SP1, right? I think he's got that talent. And one other thing to consider, especially in a redraft, is this is his free agent year, right? So he's set to become a free agent next year. And so the Angels are going to take all the kid gloves and restrictor plates off of Shohei Ohtani. They're going to use him, especially if they are under the impression that he's leaving, right? There's no reason to baby Ohtani's arm or have him start every 6th day if you're going to lose him next year. Let's go for it, right? We have Shohei Ohtani. So previously, he had 160, he pitched 166 innings last year. We know that they're pretty conscious of his usage. What if that does go up to 200 innings and he stays healthy? Which there's no reason to think that he's not going to stay healthy. I love it. Watching his sweeper is such a cool pitch. He threw a sweeper 37.4% of the time, which is his highest use pitch. I don't know that I've seen that with a lot of pitchers as well. So it's sweeper, 4-seam, and then splitter 11.8% of the time. His sweeper, do you know the run value on the sweeper last year?
I don't. How's that registered on Savant? Which one of his 12 pitches is that?
The sweeper? So
Yeah. Oh, it is on here. I've never seen that before.
yeah.
Okay, they've added that.
So minus 25 run value on the sweeper, which I'm guessing, I haven't looked yet, but I'm guessing might be the number 1 pitch overall in baseball last year. Last year it was minus 10 on the sweeper. The splitter last year was minus 11, and this year it was minus 1. But the splitter surrendered a 126 average with a 252 slug and a 49.4% whiff rate. He's just a badass, right? 2 pitches above 42% whiff rate. The sweeper, which he threw, like I said, 37% of the time at a 38.2% whiff rate. One other interesting note with his profile is that his velocity took a slight jump last year, and there's a little less movement in his pitches. So he was obviously trying to throw the ball a little bit harder. No real big splits to speak of. 221 average and a 284 slug versus left-handers, 188 average. 284 on base percentage, 636 OPS. And then versus righties, 188 average, 518 OPS. Slightly better against right-handers, but no split to be concerned with. Man, it would be a hard question for me whether to utilize him as a hitter or a pitcher in fantasy, if that's the type of league that you're in a weekly league. He's awesome. He's awesome. I hope we see 200 innings from him. And it was pretty easy for me to make him my SP3.
Sweet.
We got it for?
Shane McClanahan.
Okay. We diverge again. McClanahan is not in my top 8. Let's talk about McClanahan.
Yeah, so just a little context. So I have McClanahan and Strider here. I think we have a bias, we being the larger community, not you and I. I think towards the second half of seasons, as we go into winter, into spring training, and as such, we forget how good McClanahan was in the first half in 2022. His swinging strike rate is the same as Spencer Strider. He gets more chase. His zone contact rate is basically in the zone. It is almost the same as Spencer Strider. And when I look at these two young guys, McClanahan kind of went through that first year, and there's an evolution, right? So when pitcher comes, they pitch really well. The league kind of reacts to them, and then the pitcher has to adjust back. to how they're going to get maybe opposite handed hitters out or add another pitch to diversify as hitters see them more. McClanahan's a year ahead of Strider, right? They're both smaller guys. They both throw really hard. But to me, McClanahan is a kind of year ahead in that progression. But they're both really, again, based on these metrics, looking at the amount of swing and miss again, how dominant they are in the zone. What pushed me McClanahan over Strider was the fact that, again, he's a year ahead in that progression. So as great as Strider was, I just think it's Major League Baseball. Like they're going to push back. There's going to be guys are going to approach him differently, and he's going to have to continue to evolve and show he can evolve the way that McClanahan did last year and widen his arsenal and his usage. The word on McClanahan is the hard contact, right? I talked about that with Cole. His projected home barrel to fly ball rate, 21.2%. Cole's was 19, so that kind of gives you that's the range he's in. But what he has that Cole doesn't have is that swing and miss in the zone and the swinging strike rate, and also the command and pitching plus is higher for McClanahan. So, he brings the velocity, the depth of the arsenal, the command, swing miss in the zone. And again, I just think if he had finished the year healthy, he would be getting valued much higher in the market. And when I look at him, I see based on the skills and things, I see him much more the pitcher he was in the first half and his skills.
Do you worry at all about ground ball heavy pitchers coming into 23 with the new shift rule? Does it impact? So it impacted me with McClanahan a bit that he's a 50% ground ball pitcher pitching on turf essentially in Tampa. I also don't know how much Tampa values infield defense or infield range, I guess is a better way to put it.
For sure.
Or if you've got Franco at short and Lowe at second, right? And God knows who at first and third. Honestly, and you're a 50% ground ball pitcher. For me, there's a bit of concern, right? I'm watching spring training games. There have been ground balls hit where I'm in my mind, I've already transitioned from when I was a kid and seeing a ground ball in certain places as a hit to what was last year where something up the middle was an out, all the way back to this year. There were balls where I'm like, oh, that's an out, and it's actually a hit because the shift isn't there anymore. So I wonder, I don't doubt, I love McClanahan's skill as well, but if you take the ground ball heavy lean on turf with a bad defense and some injury concern, right, from a smaller framed pitcher throwing 98 miles an hour, there's enough red flags to maybe want to see one more year. He is in my top 16. He's just not in my top 8, right? He's more of a wait and see for me. But I do, and I think that in a redraft, right, we might see someone like McClanahan's going to go higher than where I'm going to be able to take him, because there'll be somebody in a redraft that agrees with you, and you could be 100% right, but they'll agree with you and take McClanahan higher than I'm willing to. No debate on his skill. Love his skill set. Love the arsenal. Again, the ground ball lean, the defense in Tampa, playing on turf, AL East, small body, throwing close to 100 miles an hour. Those are enough for me to say, okay, let me see one more year. Let me see him build to even 160 innings again from him. Okay, two seasons, 160 innings, no real injury concerns at this point. Velocity's still there. Let's go.
Yeah, it's 100%. I think that makes perfect sense. And then I think the other thing where did his ground ball rate go? I just had it in front of me. Batted ball, there it is. So his ground ball rate in 21 was 47%. Last year was 50.5. So it went up by 3% essentially.
Yep.
His BABIP in 21 was 340, and last year it was 260. So huge, 80-point difference. And his whip went from point. Let's see here. Where'd it go? Standard whip. Yeah, 127 when he had a 340 BABIP to 0.93 when he had the 260 BABIP. So yeah, to your point, that makes me think, with the shift limitations, and I think teams like Tampa will be ahead of the curve in how they adjust to the new rules.
I agree.
But that being said, they're not going to be able to take away necessarily every hit that they were able to mitigate with the extreme shifts, right? So definitely, I think a sub one whip with that profile probably is not within the range of outcomes for sure moving forward.
The truth is probably somewhere in the middle, right? I think in 21, I have his numbers as slightly different on Fangraphs, but very close to what you said. I think in 21, his BABIP was higher than league average, and he surrendered a slightly above league average ground ball rate, which are almost in line, but not quite. I think the BABIP was slightly unlucky, and I think last year, when your ground ball rate goes up, the expectation is the BABIP will also go up because there's more hits on ground balls, right? We all know that, but the BABIP actually went way down by almost 8 points. So to me, the truth is somewhere in the middle. I would assume that he has a slightly above average ground ball rate, but not 50% next year. And that his BABIP settles somewhere in the 290 range, which takes him probably to a low one between like maybe 105 and 110 whip. But the strikeouts are going to remain, right? So if he's healthy, that still puts him in, again, for me, a lower end SP1, but a super valuable pitcher. I also, so not to go too far on a tangent, but I worry about Tampa pitchers, man. Like there's so many injuries, and we all know that they take risks on pitchers that have a higher propensity for injury in general, because that's what they identify as a market inefficiency. But I worry. You see so many pitchers just go down in their organization. They'll use them and use them and use them, and then they go down. That's not a reason to downgrade McClanahan, but it is something that is in the back of my mind for sure.
Right.
My number 4 is kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum. We'll do this and then take a quick break and finish out. Is Aaron Nola. Aaron Nola was one of the keys to our TGFBI championship last year. I think we got him in the 4th round, and he was a pitcher who was undervalued. He's a pitcher who very rarely meets his actual counting stats don't reflect his rate stats, and that's always been the case with Nola. Last year, he was 11-13. In our league, those losses would hurt, but he's 11-13 with a 3.25 ERA, 205 innings, 235 strikeouts, and only 29 walks. So his K minus BB was 25.5, and his WHIP was 0.96. That's, if you're not paying close attention to Aaron Nola, I think that those rate stats are eye-popping, right? You don't really expect that from him. His xFIP was 277. Nothing else is really out of the ordinary. He does surrender some barrel, 7.1%, which has put him in the 52nd percentile. He's a little better against left-handers and right-handers last year. His swinging strike rate was slightly lower than what you might want from an elite pitcher at 12.6%. But as I said with, who were we talking about earlier? Oh, Evan Phillips. We were talking offline. Nola does throw the sinker 18.8% of the time, which, as we know, the sinker is a pitch that is meant to induce weak contact and not strikeouts. So I think that's part of the reason for the lower swinging strike rate. That said, 4 of his 5 pitches had a negative run value. The only one positive was his changeup, which he's probably throwing for visual purposes, but he surrendered a 319 batting average and a 434 slug against the change. But he's super consistent. 4 very good pitches, 5 pitches in his arsenal. He threw more than 6.5% of the time. Fastball, curveball primarily. And he's become a pitcher we can count on to produce at this level. Kind of boring, right? Like, you pick Aaron Nola, no one's going to go crazy that you picked Aaron Nola, but he's proven that he believes in, or he belongs in this range for me. Where do you have Nola?
Unranked. I mean, he's not in my top 8, and I have not ranked beyond that.
What? No Aaron Nola?
No.
235 strikeouts and 200 innings, and he's not in your top 8?
Nope.
He's thrown 200 innings 3 of the 4 years, not counting the COVID year.
Innings aren't a category, my friend.
And he's thrown 200, or he's had 200 plus strikeouts in 18, 19, 21, and 22. So 200 plus strikeouts, 200 plus innings, all but 1 year when he threw 180, and he's not in your top 8.
Mm-mm.
I know you haven't done your deep dive. What is the deficiency with Aaron Nola for you?
I think he's a very good pitcher. I mean, his stuff is only 107. His swinging strike rate only 12.6. Zone contact rate almost 85%. So, I mean, I'm looking more at like strikeouts and ceiling and things like that. And he's kind of like a Sandy Alcantara light in terms of he doesn't have the velocity of Sandy, but someone who really gets a lot of chase, right? 37% O swing. Sandy's at
Wait,
37.9. So they're guys that have great command. His command is exceptional, right? He's 108.9. So I think what Nola does great and why I think I don't remember our exact conversation was like, hey, he has good stuff. He has a deep mix, right? I love that he has a two seam and a four seam, and they both have a negative 11 run value. Like I like fastball, like guys who have a good fastball, right? And they're not reliant on a slider or something like that. I really appreciate that about him, and I really also value command. The reason he's not my top eight is just the lack of strikeouts and the lack of swing and miss. So and it's the same argument you can make for Sandy, right?
he
He has
hasn't.
to accumulate innings. So
I disagree. He hasn't struck out fewer in the 4 years other than the COVID year, from 18 to 22. He has had no fewer than 223 strikeouts in a season. So for me, and I assume that's ranked, that's like in the top five, right? So
probably.
that's my pushback. And I think that this is where I'm just going to call it out. This is where a metric like Stuff Plus failed,
Hmm.
right? Because
Yeah,
you said his Stuff Plus
absolutely.
was 107, right?
Yep.
Which is not elite. We know that. It's above
Right.
average for starting pitcher average is what, 96 or something like that? Somewhere in that range.
Yeah. Yeah. 99, 100. Yeah.
So
98.
in my mind, and watching Nola, I don't see the elite stuff from Nola, right? And so he's not as impressive to me as say a Hunter Green. But the strikeout numbers speak for themselves, right? And so that's when I think that it's a good metric to give us a baseline as to what the pitcher's doing or what the hitter's doing, but it's not the end all for me. And I know it's not for you either, but
No.
I just see a durable pitcher who is striking out 200 batters and you can count on that. To me, that's huge. To me, I would take that over a Strider or a McClanahan or any of these guys who haven't thrown 200 innings yet. Give me Nola. Give me Nola all day, right? At least in this range. Now, when we're getting lower, I'll take some chances. But for my SP1, give me Aaron Nola all day. Sorry, it's
No, that's great. And I thought I love that you called me out on this stuff because the reality is that the idea or the what's novel and helpful about stuff is that it normalizes in a smaller sample.
right,
But guys like Nola who have accumulated a track record, you have to throw that kind of out the window, right?
right,
And so for someone like me who nerds out on like pitching, I need to strike a better balance with guys like this of looking at less at the pitch qualities and more like what this guy has demonstrated that he can do.
right. Well, I
Um,
think, but they're
and
both
I think
really
he is,
important tools, right?
yeah,
Like,
right. And I think, and when I see, I, I appreciate Nola more having rostered him last year, more, having watched him more closely,
right.
but looking at his Savant page, not the dots, but I like how it encapsulates all his capsules. There is some like volatility, right? There's some up and down.
Sure.
You know, there's been years where he's in the bottom percentile in terms of max exit and hard hit rate. You know, and his K minus BB is exceptional, but it's exceptional because of his command, right?
Right.
You know, his K rate's in that 25, 27% range consistently, which is good. Not elite. Yeah, so as I was saying, Nola's K minus PV, which is a great indicator for pitchers, is exceptional, and it's really dependent on his low walk rate, which he has consistently demonstrated. So yeah, I mean, really good pitcher, and I'm guilty maybe of underselling his track record and looking too closely at some of the ceiling and the fun pitch qualities of the guys that I ranked higher.
Mhm.
I could do a better job with that.
Well, it's hard to balance, right? Like there's,
Mm.
you have players who are like managers who looks solely at their counting stats and they miss out on the next great player who like a Dylan Cease last year, right? Because they're not digging deeper into what each pitch means and how lucky or unlucky they got or what can be developed. And then you have players who are so into the nitty gritty that you lose sight of some of the other stuff. And I don't think that's you. I think this is more of a one-off,
Sure.
but I think that there's, obviously the trick is to land somewhere in the middle, because the name of the game is the counting stats. The name of the game
Yeah.
is, the categories that we score ultimately, but you don't find an Evan Phillips. You don't find a Dylan Cease. There's so many other pitchers that you don't find unless you start to dig more, right?
Yeah.
Anyways, I appreciate the honesty and the transparency. And I think this is part of the learning for both of us is in real time are these conversations. Number 5. We're at number 5 for you as well, right?
Yeah.
Who's your number 5?
So I had Spencer here.
Okay. Also not in my top
McClanahan and
8.
Spencer. Okay.
We've talked a bit about him in the past. Let's go with Spencer Strider.
Yeah. So I think I feel like I'm low on him just the way he's being viewed. I was listening to a labor recap last weekend. He went like at pick 29 after the first 3 or 4 starters, but you can't really mitigate what he did last year. I think the only questions are about, does he add another pitch? How does his body hold up? As I mentioned, McClanahan, he's a smaller in stature, so how is he going to hold up throwing as hard as he does? But in terms of the swinging strike rate and the zone contact, he is able to beat people in the zone. His command was actually over league average, and his stuff plus was second only to Glasnow and DeGrom. So you have some of that kind of stuff, and then with command as well, it's hard to overlook. And then what he did from a rate stat, his K minus BB last year was 29.7%, and his xFIP and Sierra were 2.3 and 2.41. Which are both exceptional. So there's nothing in the underlying skills that say he was necessarily lucky or anything like that. But again, I think he is young. I think there is going to be a period of adjustment. I don't think I would be the one to draft him as my SP1. But I think skills wise, I have him as my 5th best pitcher.
I love the skills. Rode him last year, was lucky enough to have him last year. Obviously dealt him in the offseason. We're talking about our home league. We can't predict pitcher health. We all know that, right? We talked about it earlier. But you're talking about a 6-foot pitcher who's throwing 100 miles an hour, who last year is the first year he ever threw over 100 innings, right? He threw 131 and 2/3 innings last year. And he had one minor league season prior to that where he threw under 100 innings. So if we're putting a percentage on, does he reach, like odds on, does he reach 150 innings this year? I'm betting that he doesn't, right? I just don't. I think it's unrealistic. He's of exceptional health if he's able to reach 150 innings after one minor league season of less than 100 innings and one major league season of 131 innings, right? So if you're asking me to invest in a pitcher with these traits, right, with these accomplishments at an SP5, I can't do it. I can't do it. From a skill standpoint, absolutely. Like, his numbers are insane. 38.3% strikeout rate is nuts, right? Almost 30% K minus BB is crazy. He's surrendered a 179 average, right? 24 years old. He's throwing 99 miles an hour. He was super fun to watch. I loved watching him pitch. I loved rostering him. I just can't justify the pick. I can't justify the likelihood of him reaching even 150 innings being less than 50% in my mind. It's the same argument as DeGrom, right? I think they're both obviously incredibly talented pitchers. I'm going to let someone else take them, and I'm going to take my number 5, Sandy Alcantara. Give me the 200 plus innings. And you can make an argument about Sandy's health as well, because they rode him so hard the last couple of years. But give me the 200 innings, right? This is fantasy. We need to compile, unless you can take Strider and guarantee that your next 2, 3, 4 pitchers are 180 to 200 innings, then to me, there's too much risk. It has nothing against his skill set. It's nothing against his talent. I'm not even worried about the third pitch. I think the fastball and slider are so dominant, he doesn't need a third pitch. I don't. But I'm too worried
I
about.
wonder from a I want to say durability. That's not the right, from a longevity standpoint. To me, and again, I shouldn't. It's my opinion based on what I understand and the kind of the trends I've seen. That sliders are very hard on pitchers' arms.
They are.
And so that's the thing that worries me. Not so much like, is the pitch good enough to complement his four seam? Which his four seam was absolutely sick at a negative 20 run value. I think that's Carlos Rodon is basically the only person that has a four seam that is that negative of a run value. It's not about the quality of the slider. It's like, I think it would benefit him to throw it less just because it's a pitch that is very hard on pitchers' arms to, again, not being a doctor, not studying that, but anecdotally, based on what I've read, heard, understood, seen, slider heavy pitchers tend to have arm trouble.
Well, and if you're a 2-pitch pitcher, think about it this way. We're talking about a 6 foot, 200-pound guy. If you're a 2-pitch pitcher and either of those 2 pitches has any sort of reduction in quality, then you're now a 1-pitch pitcher, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or a 1.5 pitch pitcher. And I bring up his size because I think it's more likely that a pitcher of his stature does lose a little velocity or does lose a little bit of sharpness on the slider because he's smaller. And it's harder on his arm to generate that kind of power. And so I don't know. I guess the theme for me in this pod is, and I didn't realize it coming in, but the theme for me in this pod is give me safety, right? Give me 200 strikeouts and 200 innings if you can, and a whip that's below 1-1. And that's how you build out a roster. And, you know, a player like a pitcher like a Strider is fun. A pitcher like a McClanahan is fun. But from my personal rankings, when I'm going to build a team, there's too much risk, especially when they're sitting next to the dude that's done it. That's not to say that Nola's not going to have TJ this year. I don't know, but that's the theme. That's the theme for me. My 5 is Sandy Alcantara, Cy Young Award winner in the NL last year. I don't love his profile, and his profile is pretty unique, but I think the numbers for him speak loudly. A whip under 1. As we all know, the K rate is the thing that's not elite with him. 23.4% K rate, 207 strikeouts and 228 2/3 innings. He did is intentional 53.4% ground ball rate last year. You got to wonder with Alcantara, you got to wonder if he's impacted by the shift or the lack of shift, as we've spoken. Also, their plan for their infield defense, I believe.
I was going to say, do you want to implement the lack of defense as well?
Yeah, it's Joey Wendell and Luis Arise up the middle is their plan as of right now. And to me, that's ludicrous. If you're an organization,
don't forget Gene Segura at third.
You're an organization that has Edward Cabrera and Sandy Alcantara, like these ground ball heavy dudes, and you're not putting a good defense up the middle. It's insane to me. I don't get what they're doing. It wouldn't surprise me to see, I don't know if they're smart, and I shouldn't say that. I'm not in the major league office, but if I'm them, I'm weaning him off the sinker, and I'm having him throw more four-seam change and slider, right? Given the context of the defense and the rules. I don't care if he gives up fly balls. You're in Miami. It's hard to hit the ball out there. But a unique profile. It was funny. The comparable pitchers based on velocity and movement, according to Savant, were 2022 Luis Ortiz, the pitching prospect for the Pirates, 2020 Jose Urania, 2020 Sixto Sanchez, 2020 Luis Castillo, and 2020 Anthony DeSclafani. I found that funny that those were the comps based on velocity and movement. He does throw 4 pitches 20% of the time. I think that means that he from a stuff standpoint, he's very much adaptable if they need him to be a different type of pitcher. What I think will happen with him is they'll have him. You're talking about the NL Cy Young Award winner. They'll have him go back out and do what he's done, and if they have to rein back the sinker and add more fastball and slider, they will. But he's still incredibly talented. I don't love the fact that he's thrown 200 plus innings the past 2 years. I think that's a reason for a little bit of concern. But he's still, I think you have to keep him top 8. Did you have him top 8?
I have him just outside at number 9.
Okay. What are your concerns with him? I know you rostered him last year.
Yeah, I think you've outlined it. It's the defense, it's the team context, it's the approach. I think while it makes me admire and enjoy the heck out of him as a pitcher and a performer, for fantasy, it's not ideal. Because he leaves himself at the whims of bad ball luck and a poor bullpen behind him, and like all those little things that again, I think on the margins you can be you ideally want to make those decisions later on down the line. There should be tiebreakers and with less talented players. But I think up in this range, when I'm trying to pick between these really talented pitchers, that's why he's not higher for me. I think it does cost you. I was in the head-to-head playoff. The team didn't pitch him in their last game because they weren't competitive, and that really hurt me. And so, the poor team, I don't have any doubts about his performance. I really don't. His changeup was a negative 25 run value pitch. It's a really dominant swing and miss pitch, and I think he is adaptable enough where if he wanted to go out there and try to strike people out, I think he has the stuff to do it. But I also don't think that's his goal. I think his goal is to go deep into games and to dominate and stay in the game as long as he can.
Right.
And he is talent, and he's going to be. That's what he tries to do. And so again, more power to him. He's incredible to watch, and I really like Sandy. But for fantasy, I have him at number 9.
It's interesting because you compare him to Garrett Cole, and I talked about Cole's propensity for giving up home runs, the potential introduction of a 2-seam or a sinker, just something of variety to induce weak contact. And then I talk about Sandy on the other hand, who I'm talking about giving up some of that ground ball. And I think that they're at two opposite ends of the spectrum with regards to approach. And both of them are effective, right? Both of them are elite, but it is interesting to look at. You're wishing for both of them to be somewhere more in the middle. I wish that he threw the sinker 10% of the time instead of 25% of the time, right? Because I think that is an issue for him. And I wish that he threw the 4-seam maybe even a little more. You watched him more than me. I didn't look at his heat maps. Does he try to elevate with the 4-seam at all, or is he just pounding the zone low?
No, it's definitely high. His heat maps, like he's going outside inside the left-handers and high in the zone.
Right.
Yep. And it is a finished pitch for him. Like he doesn't use it early in the count typically. It is more late in the count that he'll use it.
He's a badass, but I agree with you. I think like the 14 wins last year is damn near his ceiling for wins. And you're also talking about slightly fewer Ks than, especially if he pitches fewer innings than some of the other pitchers in this range. I'm not going to give up on the sub-1 whip and the 200 strikeouts until he gives me reason to. One other slight concern is he was a lot less effective in the second half last year. 1.76 ERA in the first half with the surrendering a 524 OPS, and then second half is a 3.09 with the 671 OPS. So that plus the number of pitches and number of innings on his arms, just something to monitor, but I can't put him lower than 5. Did we do your 5 already?
Yeah.
So who's your 6?
So my 6 is Tyler Glasnow.
Okay. Let's go.
So this is a DeGrom Strider type process for me. The 3 of the 5 categories the pitchers have control over is, ERA, whip, and strikeouts. So Glasnow, unlike Strider, is 6'7", so he is a larger frame pitcher. doesn't have that type of body issues. As such, his stuff plus and pitching plus are actually even better than DeGrom.
Mhm.
However, he has never performed at the level of DeGrom in terms of posting the amount of innings. So he's entering his age 29 season. And so, but I just think the pitch quality and the team context is such where if we have that discussion about if he gets to 120, 140 innings, what that could look like for fantasy
Sure.
in those three categories on your ratios and your strikeouts could be tremendously impactful. So especially right now, it looks really silly because he's on the shelf. But when I did these rankings, I wasn't expecting 200 innings because that's not the type of pitcher that he is. It's more on that per inning impact. And I know that we've had this discussion 3 or 4 times on the pod, so we don't have to go over it again. It's not a volume play; it's a skill play, and he's just off the charts when it comes to. Again, he has some of these same pitch qualities as the McClanahan or Strider, but it comes with a guy who's a 6'8", and it's just absolute physical beast out there. So
Yeah. He
has a closer arsenal.
It's too bad that he hasn't stayed healthy because he's a Cy Young Award winner as far as his stuff and his ability goes. Obviously we approach this from a different perspective, so I won't comment too much on Glass now. I love his stuff as well. And like I said, it's too bad that he hasn't stayed healthy. I do wonder if he does become a reliever based on that at some point in time. But yeah, from a rate standpoint and a stuff standpoint, phenomenal pitcher.
It's interesting, just and we'll move on here, but they gave him a 2-year contract. He's making $5 or $6 million this year and then 25 next year. And the Rays are a progressive organization. To see how this year goes, how many innings he has. If they were the team that kind of implemented the opener. Like what could they do to get $25 million of value from him next year if they realize he's not ever going to be a 180 inning starter?
Right.
Because I'm a fanboy of his. Like I feel for him when he goes through this stuff because Tyler works exceptionally hard on his body, his nutrition. I mean, the guy is absolutely dedicated to his craft, his body, trying to be the best pitcher he can be. And so like my heart breaks a little bit every time he doesn't get to go out a chance to play because he is putting in the work. Like I follow him, I read about him, I've listened to him talk. He's very passionate about pitching and trying to be the best. And so I can't remove that from my evaluation. I can try to, but the reality is I'm in the tank for the guy. And I just think if he ever is able to get to the point where he is able to stay on the mound, it could be really special. So
my number 6 is a 38-year-old Max Scherzer. 11-5, 11-5 record, 145 in the third innings last year, 173 strikeouts, 0.9 whip, 191 whip, 30.6% K rate. Scherzer. The thing that I love about him and Verlander, for that matter, is that they continue to evolve as pitchers, right? Scherzer is not as overpowering as he once was. In a lot of ways, his velocity is still pretty much the same. The stuff quality is just I'd say a half notch below where it was previously, but he's still dominant. The only question with him is health. I think if he throws 180 innings, you can predict 15 wins. Well, you can't predict wins, but the assumption is on a 100-win team like the Mets, 15 or so wins, 210, 220 strikeouts, and probably right around a 3 ERA, maybe even a sub-3 ERA. There's not a whole lot to get into with him. He throws 5 pitches over 9% of the time, four-seam fastball dominant 45.4% of the time, negative 13 run value, slider at a negative 18 run value. No pitch surrendered above a 224 average, 365 slug, or below a 21.2% whiff. So I don't know, it's still Max Scherzer, right? Fly ball pitcher in a good fly ball park, pretty good outfield defense there. Everything is there for him, provided health to have another Max Scherzer type year. His velocity has gone down each of the last 4 years. but it's only gone from 94.9 to 94.1. But I think it's expected, both him and Verlander, to see, a slight downtick each year with the quality of stuff, including the velocity. But they're so smart and they're such great pitchers. They're Hall of Famers that you're still going to get great value. So he's my number 6. Do you have Scherzer in top 8?
I do not.
Right. Any reason why?
No particular reason why, no.
That's fair. I think that at this level, you're starting to pick the guys who there's not a lot of differentiation from pitcher to pitcher for a number of probably the next 10 or 15. I think that I could have put McClanahan here and it would have been justifiable. Could have put in my mind, could have put Strider here, could have put any number of pitchers here. So
sure.
So are we at 7 now? Is that right?
Yes, Cole was my 7, so we already talked about him.
Sweet. All right, so my 7 is Luis Castillo. 30 years old, now in the Mariners, was in the big trade for Edwin Arroyo and Noelvi Marte and, a couple others. Last year, 8-6, 2.99 ERA, 150.1 innings, 167 Ks, 1.08 WHIP. Everything else is pretty much in line. BABIP 275, left on base percentage 75%. Changed his pitch mix. And this is something I alluded to a little bit earlier with Cole. And this was when I'm going to not go off, but so the movement and the velocity on Luis Castillo's pitches, which are four seam, sinker, change, slider, was no different in 2021 with the Reds as it was in 2022 with the Reds and the Mariners. So velocity is the same, movement is the same, pitch mix is the same, or pitch selection is the same. He gets to the Mariners. Well, this started with the Reds. He was throwing more four-seamers with the Reds than he had previous years, right? Because he was a sinker change pitcher for a long time. He gets to the Mariners. Mariners like, no, we don't do that, right? We traded for you so that you can throw the four-seam and the slider more. And all of a sudden, he becomes an ace. So he ends up with a negative 18 run value on the four-seam, which is, as you stated, with Rodon and Strider, you don't see that. You don't see those levels of run value from a four-seamer. The quality of the four-seamer is insane. His ability to elevate it is insane. Surrendered a 152 average, 194 slug, which is nuts, and a 33.7% whiff rate on the four-seam last year. Like, you don't see that kind of whiff rate on a four-seam. You just don't. So, one, park context, right? You're going from probably the most difficult park to pitch in the majors to a bottom two hitters park in the majors in Seattle. Just off the bat, right? Better organization, 90-win organization, better defense behind him, and a team that knows how to teach pitchers what pitches to throw. So it's more of for me, this is purely an indictment on the Cincinnati Reds, that you had a pitcher who's throwing exactly the same shit, and yet the Mariners have a Cy Young Award candidate, and he was a number 2, number 3 starter, and for all intents and purposes on the Reds. I think it's nuts. If organizations like the Reds don't get on board with what everyone else is doing, they're going to continue being shitty organizations. How do you give up a pitcher like that and not understand, not be able to utilize him to their full capabilities? I'd be so pissed if I was a Reds fan. I thought it was crazy to look at those two at his pitches and see that they're exactly the same over the 2 years, given the results over the 2 years. Because there was no luck involved in him getting to where he was in 2022, right? It was just a pitch mix change. Do you have any thoughts on Castillo?
I mean, I love him. I have rostered him on a couple different fantasy leagues, but I have a soft spot for the Reds, and Castillo is one of my favorite pitchers that they've had, one of my favorite players they've had. And yeah, I think he is a pitcher undergoing sort of an evolution, going, whether that is him being smart enough or savvy enough to realize that he's in a different environment, right? And he doesn't have to try to get everyone to roll over on a ground ball.
Yep.
to keep the ball out of the air in Cincinnati, and he's able to utilize his four seam, or if that's the Mariners bringing that data to him and encouraging him and coaching him to utilize it. I think he's using his four seam and slider differently. We saw that change, and I think he has different ways to get people out, and I love that variability. I love, and he's someone that has that velocity, has good command, not great command, but good command. So, yeah, four pitches above 20% usage. I mean, I just dig on that. And you bring that velocity, and he's a competitor, and he's also very durable. And that 3/4 arm slot, I think, keeps his shoulder in good health. So, yeah, I love Luis. And I told, Matt asked me, I don't remember, it's been a while ago, and I was like, he's like, where'd you take him over? So I was, man, I would take him just about where everybody,
Mm-hmm.
and that was reflected in our TGFBI draft. I was thrilled to get him where we did.
Mm-hmm.
I value him over a lot of the other guys who went above him.
If you can just look at, and I'll be done after this, but I stated the numbers on the four seam. The slider surrendered, and I know there's a relationship in terms of usage.
Mm-hmm.
But the slider surrendered a 183 average, 294 slug. And then the sinker is a 277 average, 432 slug. And the changeup was 239 average, 425 slug. Just those raw numbers alone, I know that there are other factors, but we all know sinkers surrender a higher average, right? They just
Right.
do
Yes, they do.
as a pitch. Whereas four seamers and sliders, especially his four seam and slider, don't. So just throw the pitches that are more effective as singular pitches. I know there's a relationship between how you use them, sequencing, all that. I get it. But the relationship does not dictate a 100-point difference in average or a 200-point difference in slug, right? It's less than that. So again, it's insane to me that the Mariners were able to acquire him. I think that they immediately became a contender with the Astros by acquiring Castillo, period. Like hard stop.
Yeah.
So
So
we're
just a real quick, when I mentioned about like his arsenal and his ability to get people out. So,
Mhm,
I mean, the four seam on his stuff plus on the four seam is 115. I
mhm,
mean, that's exceptional. I mean, usually guys can get by with like a 95 stuff plus on their fastball and
right.
115, and the other thing about it is he locates all of his pitches.
Yep.
His four seam location is 103, changeup 102, slider 102, sinker 102. So
Yep.
he can throw whatever pitch he wants wherever he wants
Yep.
to get guys out. And I think again that variability with the velocity and the team context change is why I'm so in on him.
It's awesome. Let's pivot a little. I know we're at 7. You didn't give your 7, did you?
We did. That was Cole for
Oh, that's
me.
right. So
Yeah.
let's cut it at 7. Maybe we come back with another 8 on the
Yeah.
next episode. Uh,
Okay.
we were gonna do camp thoughts. We might actually, it might be fun to do camp thoughts from spring training as
There
opposed
we
to
go.
right now.
Okay.
Um,
Sure.
we are going to be in Scottsdale as of Thursday after. You're coming in Thursday night, right?
I am.
So
Yeah.
as of Thursday night, 11 of the 16 in our league are going to be converge in Phoenix for spring training. We're going to be there for the weekend. We're going to start our draft. I think we're all giddy with excitement at this point in time. Going to be super fun. Any thought? We're going to see some of them are going to see the WBC game, which is the Angels against the US team Thursday. We're going to see Dodgers Angels on Friday, and then Mariners Rockies on Saturday. Some of us will see a game on Sunday as well. But yeah, couldn't be more excited. Any thoughts for you on the upcoming spring training trip?
Yeah. So it's my first trip, and so I think so. It's first experience for me, and just wondering. I know that we're gonna go. We have tickets to the Friday Saturday game. I'm interested to hear what the game was on the Sunday agenda
Mm-hmm.
as well. But yeah, just like how like proximity, can we see batting practice, like that kind of stuff, like how much like access is there to like practice and stuff. I'm really eager just to see an experience because I know, as you said, you've set a really high bar. And so I think that's for me being a new experience, something that I'm looking forward to. And I think meeting everyone for the first, like, there's a lot of people I've never met. Like, I developed relationships over text and things like that. But to meet these people who I've engaged with in person. And then I think the third thing, it's the live. We're not going to do a live draft. We're going to have live periods. You know, it's been years since I was at a draft with people and we are all drafting at the same time. And it's not an experience I've had. Honestly, with baseball, when I've had that experience, it's been football, which I think we talked a little bit about on the pod before.
Yeah.
But that's always just a special energy and time. And we're also invested in this league. And while, yes, a lot of the players left to pick from are not exciting, we're still drafting. And so I think that that's something I'm really looking forward to as well, because it's just a special experience to get to draft people that in a reoccurring league where you have relationships. So I'm really, really excited for that part, as well as all the baseball part.
It's going to be amazing. And like I've said before, you can set the bar for spring training wherever you want to set it. And I 100% guarantee it's going to exceed that expectation. It's just spring training is just like that. It's the best. All right, man. Let's if we can get the rest of the SP1s in this week, let's do it. Otherwise, we'll put it off until spring training, and certainly we'll do a pod from spring training. It's gonna be a lot of fun.
Okay, that'll be nuts.
All right, bro.
Bye, Tino.
Take care.